Things are not looking good for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and she's starting to panic. Okay, so get this. 2 days ago, Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old ICU nurse who served veterans at the Minneapolis VA hospital, was shot and killed by Federal Border Patrol agents on a Minneapolis street. He was a U.S. citizen. He had no criminal record. He was legally carrying a firearm with a valid Minnesota permit. And within hours, the Trump administration began telling a story that video footage would tear apart. And somehow Kristi Noem turned around and called him a domestic terrorist. She said he arrived with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation. DHS officials claimed he violently resisted, brandished his weapon, and posed an imminent threat. Vice President J.D. Vance and White House Deputy Chief Stephen Miller went even further, calling Preddy an assassin intent on murder. But then the videos came out. Multiple bystander recordings, analyzed frame by the New York Times, CBS News, and NBC News, show something different. They show Preddy holding a cell phone in his right hand, filming. His left hand was empty and raised. They show him intervening when agents shoved a woman to the ground, making brief contact but nothing resembling an assault. They show an agent pepper spraying him, dragging him down, others piling on. One agent appears to strike him repeatedly while he's down, and they show clearly an agent removing his gun from his waistband, less than a second before another agent fired 10 rounds in under 5 seconds. Witness testimonies corroborate what the videos show. A children's entertainer submitted a sworn affidavit stating Preddy approached with a camera, not a gun, and was not resisting but helping the woman. Another witness named Javier described seeing the agent shoot Preddy while he was face down on the ground, calling his death a sacrifice for the cause. ABC News created a minute-by-minute timeline showing the entire sequence lasted less than 30 seconds from first contact to fatal shots. That's the inciting event. That's what has turned this into a national crisis for the Trump administration. Now here's where it gets worse for Noem. Because while she doubled down, defended the agents, and refused to confirm whether Preddy was even disarmed before being shot, President Trump did something unexpected. He went quiet. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Trump was asked directly whether the agent did the right thing. His answer was not what Noem needed. He said, "We're looking, we're reviewing everything, and we'll come out with a determination." He expressed a general dislike of shootings. He focused on Preddy's gun, calling it a very powerful, fully loaded gun with 2 magazines loaded up with bullets, describing it as dangerous and unpredictable. But he did not defend the agents. He did not back Noem's narrative. And for Trump, that silence speaks volumes. On Truth Social, where Trump typically unleashes his fiercest defenses of allies and attacks on critics, he ignored Preddy's death entirely. He posted about Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He attacked Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. He railed against Representative Ilhan Omar. He highlighted a federal welfare fraud investigation. He even reposted an image of Preddy's gun, calling him a gunman. But he said nothing about the shooting itself. Nothing about whether it was justified. Nothing to support Noem. This is significant because it stands in stark contrast to how Trump handled the shooting of Renee Nicole Good just 2 weeks earlier. That was on January 7th, when another U.S. citizen was killed by federal agents in Minneapolis under similar circumstances. Back then, Trump immediately backed Noem's narrative that Good had attempted to ram agents with her vehicle, an act Noem labeled domestic terrorism. Trump praised her leadership. He defended the operation. That hasn't happened this time. So what changed? The videos changed everything. Because with the Good shooting, the administration's narrative held for longer. But with Preddy, the footage surfaced immediately. And it directly contradicted what officials were saying. Minnesota Police Chief Brian O'Hara stated publicly that the videos speak for themselves and that Preddy was lawfully exercising his First and Second Amendment rights. Governor Tim Walz dismissed the DHS account as nonsense. Preddy's parents called it sickening lies. And inside the Department of Homeland Security, fury is boiling over. Multiple DHS officials, speaking anonymously, have told reporters that Noem's statements are mismatched with the evidence. They've criticized leadership for prematurely claiming Priti intended a massacre or maximum damage without anything to support it. One official described the messaging as a case study on how not to do crisis PR. Another said the department needs a law enforcement leader, not a sicko fan. There are whispers of early retirements among rank-and-file agents who feel morale has cratered. That matters because this isn't coming from Democrats or outside critics. This is coming from inside Noem's own department. And here's the part that should concern Noem most. Even Trump's own allies, the MAGA base that usually forms a wall around administration officials, are expressing unease. Reports describe discomfort with what they call her highly problematic rush to label victims as terrorists. The concern is that she's undermining ongoing investigations and fracturing unified messaging at a moment when the administration can't afford it. Conservative outlets, including the New York Post, have called for de-escalation in Minneapolis and urged the administration to stop what they characterized as misleading narratives about the shootings. Now, let's be clear about what we're not saying here. There's no direct evidence that Trump has fired Noem or is actively removing her from his cabinet. The phrase dropping her reflects the political dynamic, the withdrawal of support, the refusal to defend, the distancing that happens when someone becomes a liability. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Noem's public demeanor has shown signs of strain. In press briefings and congressional hearings, she has evaded direct questions about whether Priti was disarmed before being shot. She accused Minnesota state officials of fabricating details. During one House session, her past statements blaming similar issues on the Biden administration were replayed, forcing her to pivot and implicate the current administration indirectly. Observers described it as a moment of panic as contradictions mounted. To understand how Noem got here, you have to understand the pattern that led to this moment. This isn't the first controversial shooting under her leadership. Just 2 weeks before Priti was killed on January 7th, federal agents shot and killed Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis under remarkably similar circumstances. Good was a 37-year-old U.S. citizen and mother of 3. According to DHS, she accelerated her vehicle toward an ICE agent named Jonathan Ross in what Noem labeled domestic terrorism. But that narrative also faced challenges. Cell phone videos and witness accounts described Good receiving conflicting orders from agents before attempting to drive away. The agent fired from the side of the vehicle, not from the front as one would expect if she were charging directly at him. An independent autopsy commissioned by her family confirmed she was shot in the head. The Hennepin County medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. Good's wife, Becca, released a statement calling the incident tragic and demanding justice. Back then, Trump fully backed Noem. He endorsed the domestic terrorism label. He praised her response. The administration presented a unified front. What changed between then and now wasn't the circumstances. It was the evidence. The Priti shooting had more videos, clearer footage, and immediate frame-by-frame analysis that made the contradictions undeniable. And when you've called one victim a domestic terrorist, and then another, and the videos keep contradicting you, the credibility gap becomes a canyon. There's also a third incident that factors into this pattern. On January 8th, the day after Good's death, Border Patrol agents in Portland shot and wounded 2 individuals, Yorlanis Zambrano Contreras and Luis David Nino Moncada, during an immigration. They're part of what DHS calls Operation Metro Surge, the largest immigration enforcement operation in the department's history. Approximately 3,000 federal agents have been deployed to Minneapolis alone. That's 5 times the size of the city's police force. The stated purpose is targeting alleged fraud in public assistance programs, particularly within the Somali American community, and carrying out deportation orders. But Operation Metro Surge has become a political and operational disaster. In less than a month, there have been 2 fatal shootings of U.S. citizens. A non-fatal shooting in Portland, protests that have drawn tens of thousands, federal judges issuing restraining orders, and a constitutional crisis brewing between the federal government and state authorities. To understand why this is unraveling, you need to understand how the system is supposed to work and how it's breaking down. Federal immigration enforcement operates under specific legal frameworks. ICE and Border Patrol agents have authority to enforce immigration law, but that authority has limits. They can conduct targeted arrests based on warrants and deportation orders. They can patrol border regions. But deploying thousands of agents to a city in the interior, conducting operations that lead to civilian deaths, and then blocking state investigators from the scene, that pushes into territory that courts, legal experts, and even some within law enforcement view as problematic. The Pretty shooting exposed these tensions in real time. Minnesota state investigators sought access to the scene under a search warrant. Federal officials blocked them. A federal judge ordered the government to preserve evidence. The state has sued, and now the investigation is being handled primarily by the FBI and Department of Justice, which critics point out creates a conflict of interest when the agency under investigation is part of the same administration overseeing the probe. This is where Noem's position becomes untenable. She's the head of the department whose agents killed a U.S. citizen on camera. The videos contradict the narrative she pushed, and now she's caught between defending her agents, maintaining her position with Trump, and facing growing calls from within her own department and from Republicans for transparency and accountability. Let's talk about FBI Director Kash Patel's role in this, because it reveals how the administration is trying to hold the line even as the narrative collapses. Patel appeared on Fox News the day after the Pretty shooting. He defended the federal narrative. He said, "You cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest." He suggested it's illegal and not protected under the right to peaceful assembly. He emphasized that repercussions follow attacks on law enforcement. But here's what happened next. Fox News host Maria Bartiromo pushed back. She asked how Pretty was threatening agents if he appeared to be filming. She questioned whether his gun was even visible. Patel avoided the specifics and deferred to DHS. Even Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino, who initially echoed the narrative that Pretty attacked officers and was brandishing a weapon, has since walked back those claims under questioning. He refused to speculate on specifics, acknowledging the investigation was ongoing. That kind of hedging doesn't happen when officials are confident in their story. The administration's narrative has evolved in telling ways. Initial claims of Pretty being an assassin intent on a massacre have quietly disappeared from official statements. The language has softened from brandished to was armed. The shift suggests internal recognition that the original story was unsustainable, and then something remarkable happened. Gun rights groups, typically reliable allies of the Trump administration, started pushing back hard. The Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus issued a statement calling Patel's remarks completely incorrect on Minnesota law. They affirmed that there is no prohibition on a permit holder carrying a loaded firearm at a protest in Minnesota. Gun Owners of America condemned the suggestion that lawful carry justifies lethal force and demanded a transparent investigation. The Second Amendment Foundation expressed sadness over the incident and rejected the implication that legal carry should make someone a target. Even the National Rifle Association, while blaming Democratic officials for political interference, rejected blaming Pretty for being armed. This is significant. These are organizations that typically defend law enforcement and align with Republican priorities. When they're publicly rebuking the FBI director and distancing from the administration's narrative, it signals something breaking in the coalition. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for the administration. There's a pattern of hypocrisy that critics have been quick to point out. Many of the same officials and commentators who defended Kyle Rittenhouse, a teenager who carried an AR-15 to a protest and killed 2 people, are now suggesting that Alex Pretty's legally carried, holstered handgun justified his death. Rittenhouse was celebrated as a hero exercising his Second Amendment rights. Pretty is being called a domestic terrorist. The difference, critics argue, is obvious. Rittenhouse was at a protest aligned with conservative causes. Pretty was at a protest against the Trump administration's immigration policies. The gun rights were identical. The political alignment was different, and that difference apparently determines whether you're a patriot or a terrorist. This hypocrisy hasn't gone unnoticed. Gun rights activists, who typically support the administration, have called it out directly, and it's created an unusual alliance between Second Amendment groups and civil liberties organizations, both demanding accountability for Pretty's death. Some Republicans in Congress have also broken ranks. Representative Andrew Garbarino, chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, requested testimony from ICE and CBP leaders. Senator Pete Ricketts demanded a prioritized investigation and stressed transparency. A senior Republican senator called for a joint federal-state probe. These aren't Democrats attacking the administration. These are members of Trump's own party expressing concern about how this has been handled. Meanwhile, Democrats have moved beyond criticism. Over 120 House Democrats have now co-sponsored an impeachment resolution against Noem, introduced by Representative Robin Kelly. The resolution alleges 3 articles: obstruction of Congress by denying members access to DHS facilities, violation of public trust through warrantless arrests and excessive force, and self-dealing through misuse of funds for an ICE recruitment campaign that allegedly benefited associates. The specific allegations are damning. Article 1 claims Noem implemented a policy in May 2025 requiring 7-day advance notice for congressional visits to DHS facilities, leading to multiple denials of access in Texas, Colorado, California, New York, Virginia, and Washington. Article 2 cites the Good and Pretty shootings, Chicago raids where U.S. citizens were detained, and incidents where tear gas was deployed on children during a Halloween parade. Article 3 alleges $200 million was funneled to an ICE recruitment ad campaign that bypassed competitive bidding under a national emergency declaration. Representative Robin Kelly said, "Enough is enough. No one is above the law." Representative Summer Lee stated, "People are being hunted. It's past time to fire Kristi Noem." Representative Angie Craig from Minnesota said, "She has violated due process. She needs to be impeached." Senator Jackie Rosen called Noem an abject failure who has lost control and demanded her impeachment. Now let's be honest about the prospects for that impeachment. Republicans control the House. The resolution is unlikely to advance, but its existence and the speed with which it gathered 120 co-sponsors reflects the scale of political pressure building. Governors Kathy Hochul and Gavin Newsom have threatened impeachment proceedings. Senators Jackie Rosen, Michael Bennet, Peter Welch, and Ruben Gallego have voiced support. Former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton have called for a reconsideration of aggressive immigration tactics. Organizations like LULAC and Voto Latino have echoed demands for Noem's removal. The administration's response has been to dig in. Noem dismissed the impeachment effort as silly during a serious time. She defended her agents' training and professionalism. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said ICE agents are acting humanely in challenging circumstances. But here's the problem with digging in. The evidence keeps contradicting the narrative. Let's compare what DHS claimed versus what the videos show. DHS claimed Pretty approached with a brandished handgun. Videos show a phone in his hand, the gun remaining in his waistband until removed by an agent. DHS claimed Pretty assaulted officers. Videos show brief contact while intervening to help a woman who had been shoved, but no assault. DHS officials claimed Pretty intended a massacre or was an assassin. There's no evidence of broader intent. He was a legally armed protester. DHS and Patel suggested carrying a loaded gun to a protest is illegal or inherently non-peaceful. Minnesota law explicitly permits this for permit holders. DHS claimed shots were fired in self-defense due to violent resistance. Videos show Pretty pinned down and disarmed before the shooting. This isn't a matter of interpretation. This is documented on camera, analyzed by multiple news organizations. And when the official narrative diverges this sharply from visible evidence, it creates a credibility crisis that's difficult to recover from. The deeper issue here is what this reveals about how the Trump administration is conducting immigration enforcement. To understand the scale of what's happening in Minneapolis, consider this. Operation Metro Surge is the largest immigration enforcement operation in DHS history. Approximately 3,000 federal agents have been deployed to a single city. That's 5 times the size of the Minneapolis police force. The stated justification is targeting alleged fraud in public assistance programs, particularly within the Somali American community, and carrying out deportation orders. The operation launched in December 2025 and escalated dramatically in January. By January 6th, 2,000 additional agents had arrived. Arrests began immediately, and within 3 weeks, 2 U.S. citizens were dead. Governor Tim Walz called it a war on Minnesota. Mayor Jacob Frey described the tactics as reckless. Tens of thousands have marched in protest. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order against arrests of peaceful demonstrators, though that order was later paused on appeal. Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, placing 1,500 soldiers on standby. This isn't a normal immigration enforcement operation. This is something closer to an occupation of a major American city. Operation Metro Surge represents a significant escalation, not just in scale, but in approach. Deploying 3,000 agents to a single city, conducting operations in sanctuary jurisdictions, authorizing tactics that local officials describe as militaristic. This includes warrantless home entries authorized by a 2025 ICE memo, masked agents without identification, and refusal to cooperate with state investigators. A former Trump White House attorney has called ICE actions way out of bounds. Civil rights organizations like the ACLU have filed lawsuits. States have passed protective laws prohibiting data sharing with ICE, and polling shows support for ICE has dropped significantly, with one survey showing 48% support and 42% favoring abolition. The administration's defenders argue this is necessary. They cite a 1,300% increase in assaults on ICE officers. They point to fraud investigations. They emphasize that sanctuary policies force high-risk operations by preventing cooperation. And they note that border crossings have dropped 72% under Trump's policies. These are real arguments, and they represent genuine policy disagreements about the balance between enforcement and civil liberties. But policy disagreements don't excuse shooting an unarmed man on camera and then lying about what happened. Let's talk about what happens next. The immediate question is whether Noem survives politically. She hasn't been fired. She hasn't resigned. But the distancing from Trump, the fury within DHS, the Republican calls for investigation, and the Democratic impeachment push all point to a position that's becoming harder to maintain. Several scenarios are possible. Trump could continue distancing himself quietly, allowing Noem to take the heat while signaling he'll eventually accept a resignation or quietly remove her. This protects him politically while sacrificing her. Trump could reverse course and fully defend Noem, betting that his base will rally around immigration enforcement regardless of the optics. This risks further alienating moderates and gun rights groups who've broken with the narrative. Noem could resign, framing it as protecting the department from political attacks. This preserves her relationship with Trump while allowing the administration to reset. Or this could drag on, with Noem holding her position while investigations proceed, protests continue, and the political damage compounds. There's also the question of accountability for the agents involved. Under normal circumstances, a shooting that contradicts the official narrative, this dramatically would lead to criminal investigation, potential charges, and policy reviews. But these aren't normal circumstances. The federal government controls the investigation. The administration has shown no interest in holding agents accountable, and the political dynamics make it unlikely that any charges will be brought while Trump is in office. That leaves the courts. The state of Minnesota has sued for access to evidence. A federal judge ordered evidence preserved. Legal challenges to Operation Metro Surge are proceeding, And if the state can establish that federal agents violated law, or if they can somehow gain jurisdiction, state charges remain theoretically possible. Here's where the transparency issue becomes critical. When the Preddy shooting happened, Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension investigators sought access to the scene under a search warrant. Federal officials blocked them. This is extraordinary. A state law enforcement agency with a valid warrant denied access to investigate a killing in their jurisdiction. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison called it extraordinary obstruction. The state filed suit, and now the investigation is being handled primarily by the FBI and Department of Justice. The same administration whose officials contradicted by the video evidence are being investigated by agencies they control. Federal agents in these operations have been operating without body cameras. Many have worn masks and refused to provide identification. These are practices that would never be tolerated in local police departments after years of reform efforts. Yet federal agents are operating under different standards, or arguably no standards at all, when it comes to transparency. This creates a fundamental accountability gap. If federal agents can kill American citizens, contradict video evidence about what happened, block state investigators, and control their own investigation, what checks exist on their power? There's also the question of what this means for Trump's broader immigration agenda. The Minneapolis shootings have become a focal point for opposition to mass deportation policies. They've provided visceral, documented evidence of what critics describe as excessive force and lack of accountability. They've created fractures within the Republican coalition, and they've energized protests and organizing that could affect political outcomes. Tributes to Preddy have portrayed him as a community hero. He dedicated his career to caring for veterans at the Minneapolis VA hospital. Colleagues described him as compassionate and dedicated. A GoFundMe for his family raised over $230,000 within days. The contrast between these tributes and the administration's characterization of him as a domestic terrorist intent on a massacre couldn't be sharper. Protests continue daily in Minneapolis. Vigils, rallies, and marches have drawn thousands. Community organizations have mobilized legal support for those detained in immigration raids. And the attention has spread nationally, with solidarity protests in cities across the country. Trump has signaled that agents will at some point withdraw from Minneapolis, though a smaller team will remain for fraud investigations. This suggests some recognition that the operation has become counterproductive. But withdrawal doesn't undo the damage to public trust, to the victims' families, to the administration's credibility. Here's what remains unresolved. We don't know whether federal agents will face any accountability for the Preddy shooting. We don't know whether Noem will remain in her position. We don't know whether the impeachment resolution will advance or remain symbolic. We don't know whether courts will intervene meaningfully in Operation Metro Surge. We don't know whether the Republican fractures over this issue will widen or heal. We don't know whether Trump will continue distancing or eventually defend Noem fully. What we do know is this: a U.S. citizen is dead. The videos contradict the official story. The head of Homeland Security is facing pressure from all sides. The president who appointed her is notably refusing to defend her. And the system that's supposed to provide accountability, investigations, oversight, checks, and balances is being tested in ways that will determine how much federal authority can expand before it breaks. The Preddy shooting isn't just about one incident. It's about whether there are limits to what federal agents can do in the name of immigration enforcement. It's about whether official narratives will be challenged when they contradict evidence. It's about whether political loyalty trumps accountability. And it's about whether the people responsible for protecting Americans can be held responsible when Americans die at their hands. Those questions don't have answers yet. But the fact that they're being asked this loudly, from this many directions, including from within the administration itself, that tells you something is breaking. There's a term in political science for what's happening to Noem: institutional abandonment. It's when an official finds themselves without the support structures that normally protect people in their position. The president goes quiet. Allies hedge their statements. Internal critics leak to reporters. The attacks continue, but the defenses don't materialize. That's Noem's situation right now. She's still in her job. She still has the title. But the power that comes from being backed by the full weight of the administration is slipping away. Kristi Noem built her political brand on being tough, on not backing down, on defending law enforcement without apology. That brand worked in South Dakota. It worked in MAGA circles. It got her a cabinet position. But it may not survive video evidence, internal revolt, Republican defection, and a president who's learned that the smartest move is sometimes to say nothing at all. The media has dubbed her Ice Barbie, a reference to her polished image and hardline stance. But the nickname has become less flattering as the body count rises and the contradictions mount. Late-night hosts have torn into her statements. Editorial boards have demanded accountability, and even sympathetic outlets have urged her to de-escalate. Trump's silence isn't support. His careful phrasing isn't defense. His refusal to engage isn't strategy. It's survival. And Noem, watching that silence, watching those careful words, watching her department turn against her and her allies question her judgment, she knows what it means when Trump stops fighting for you. That's the position she's in now. That's what the videos set in motion, and that's why the next few days and weeks will determine whether this is a scandal she survives or the crisis that ends her time in the administration. The evidence is on camera. The contradictions are documented. The pressure is building. And the question everyone in Washington is asking is simple. How long before Trump decides that Kristi Noem is more trouble than she's worth? We don't have that answer yet. But every day that passes without his full-throated defense is another day the answer becomes clearer.